Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, A Contractor's Guide to Saving Money in Construction. I'm your host, Alyssa Chartier, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. Before we get started, make sure to connect with us on social media. We're eager to see your insights and check out those widgets below. You can resize any during your presentation. I have a helpful link to register for virtual MEP Force, and if James and Rob are nice, they might share their special $99 code with you there, so make sure to check that out. Be sure to visit ASTI.com to achieve your design and business objectives through our innovative solutions, training opportunities, and services. If you have not registered for the full series with Rob, James, and Mark, I have put that link down in the resource widget. Access that, go ahead and register for the rest of them. We've got some great insights here. And once again, I'll put in the plug for registering for MEP Force Virtual. It starts on the 31st of this month, and we hope to see you there. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Rob and James. Hi, guys.
How's it going?
Good. Hello, how about yourself?
Another fun afternoon.
All right, it's all you.
All right, let's have a little bit of fun today. And yeah, MEP Force, if you haven't registered, please do. I think there's a lot of amazing education that's going to happen. And it's a new, this new normal, this new time, whatever it is. You're going to be able to listen to some amazing content, see and talk about some things in a new way. And we're going to see how it works out and have some fun with it. So to start us off, my name again is Rob McKinney. Some of you may know me as the ConAb Guru. I'm glad that you joined us again today for the second part of the series. And the idea is we really want to talk about how to focus on some production tips for your company. And just to kind of set the tone, my background, I was roughly in the business about 14, 15 years. So I did come from the general contractor side of the table. However, we were a self-performing contractor for concrete, some woodwork, and a couple of different elements. So I feel like I had my hand a little bit in the production side because, well, as the safety director, and I talked about last time, well, the safety person was trying to make sure that the work could flow and production could be happening because everybody was healthy. But then I got involved in technology, really liked that a lot, and that's what we're going to talk about today is bringing some of those tips for the production, but tied into a little bit of technology. You kind of see where it's going to go today, and I'm super happy to have with me today James Simpson. So, James, I'm going to throw it to you for a second. Would you like to give us an intro and background on yourself?
Oh, for sure. So my name's James Simpson. I'm going to be just kind of seeing what, I can throw out there, tips and so on, today with Rob. But a little bit about my background is I've actually been in the industry since before I could drive, right? So been doing it for a little bit and a little bit of experience in just about everything, right? A little bit of field installation on the piping side, BIM, QA, QCN, even analyzing prefab and, the kind of shop workflow. So a little bit of everything. I've done a little bit of application development as well, right? Trying to just tailor those custom in-house workflows just to really get those fine-tuned. And, now I'm the product manager for Evolve MEP, but that's a little bit about my background. So kind of like Rob's, very similar, a little bit of hands and everything. So we'll see what we can really throw out to you guys.
Good deal, man. Glad to have you along for the ride today. We're going to have some excellent conversations. So let me see if I launch this the right way. We've got a few poll questions that we wanted to put out there. So one of the topics we're going to get into is personnel management. And this question is, does your company have an emotional intelligence program? And James and I are talking off air. We're very curious. How many people have heard this term, emotional intelligence or EQ? If you guys want to give us your answers there.
We'll leave that open for a couple of seconds. Does ESEF have one?
I'm still learning. I'm in my onboarding process still. So I've actually been over here for about 3 weeks now. I'm trying to figure out a lot of things. There's definitely talk about the concepts. It's an interesting term, though. I've done a lot of studying under Brent Darnell, who's one of our friends here from Georgia, some different people of how do you retune your mind? Right. As funny as this is going to sound, is how do you tune your mind to talk to other people and just be nice or communicate more clearly with your words? I struggle with this with my 7-year-old daughter of having to say something 3 times to finally communicate of, I'm just wanting her to go take her dinner plate in the kitchen. Why did it take
Well,
three tries?
that's one of right. That's one of the things about communication, right? Is it's not what you say, it's what the other person hears, right? So, and that's one of the most interesting parts about construction is the human element, because it takes so many different personalities to get the job done. And what's actually really funny is you notice that certain personalities fit better in certain roles, right? So you always interact with different ones. So I'm interested to see these answers too.
No.
I am not surprised.
Yeah. Maybe we should have phrased it if we knew what the concept was. So maybe we can put something in the follow-up notes there.
Right.
Now, today, this is what we want to talk about is a little bit of review. So I was going to kind of take us down just 3 quick slides. So in the first part of this, we talked about safety being production's best friend, that's scheduling components, and then conducting the crew analysis. So when we get into this, the first part we talked about in my background, as I brought up, was safety. And why does it really matter? And it's interesting if we think in the current times we are. Normally, I would always challenge and argue that safety should be kind of at the forefront of a lot of operations. You know, there's this thing called OSHA that's, a federal body that's been around since the early 70s, right? There's lots of different agencies and organizations created to improve safety on construction and industrial job sites, but it's always been a push and pull. And then this weird thing happened to us around March, and it's something that we can't see, can't touch. You don't know what's going on. And that COVID lens, I really think, is going to bring safety back to the forefront where, in particular, and James, I'd be curious your thoughts, when we talk about production, that's one thing. But when we start talking about tracking employees on job sites, you want to get the hair on the back of the neck to stand up quick, right?
Right.
You start talking about tracking workers. And generally, are they really happy about that, or forget about it, you're not tracking me? What do you think?
Right. Yeah, it's really something interesting because, I would say even 2-3 years ago, this is kind of like sci-fi stuff, right? We got time cards, I know where they're at because I signed them to that job, they're reporting to superintendent, et cetera. But, what you're really starting to see is that, especially the more cutting edge companies really trying to push the envelope with that, right? You got things where they're downloading apps and that's how they know they're on the job site. And then it's, their time card whenever they get there is active when they get within that location. And when they leave, it's cutting them off or, just different things. And you can even take it a step further where I've seen some really interesting things where they're almost doing some form of mass facial recognition through like one entry point into the job site. And obviously that's like drastically more long term, but you're still seeing some of it starting to surface just with apps and so on. So yeah, it's definitely a shift you're seeing.
Absolutely. Well, and a lot of that shift, the apps, I really think the apps and the technology are helping shift from what I refer to as those lagging indicators of basically just keeping a scorecard of, well, this happened, somebody got hurt, or there was a fatality, or there was an inspection that we failed.
Right.
The leading indicators of trying to look at those behaviors of, well, it's not just that you did a toolbox talk. How many toolbox talks have you done? It's not that you did an observation. How many? And more importantly, now with the data we can derive, well, okay, so you did 100, let's say you did 100 observations last month, James. How many of those were positive versus negative? Maybe it was 60-40. Okay,
sure.
And then if we say it was 60% negative, what did you do in the 60%? Did you close the loop? If you found 43 people not wearing safety glasses, did they put them on when you walked away?
Yeah. Did you? Right? Yeah. Did you make some kind of strategic change?
That's it. So then the second part we talked about was pre-planning, items to consider in building a plan. And there's a lot of in there that we've kind of put, but to unpack it quickly, this the high level first. Are you developing, I'm calling a site logistics plan, that do you know where on the job everything is as far as, the high level things? Where can you bring in crews? Where can you bring in materials? Where does the trash go? Where are the porta potties? How do you basically set up your game plan, your scoreboard, if you're looking at it, to strategically figure out how to implement and install the work that you're supposed to do? I gave some ideas about those preparatory plans, about how to meet, when we're talking with the trade level, have a good plan between your project manager and your foreman to go meet with the general and show them what you're planning on doing. Ask these questions. Critical path is always a moving target, but you definitely need to have an idea of what's going on because, James, I'm curious to your thoughts. What's really more important, do you think, when we're talking scheduling? Is it building this long-term 12-month drop-down schedule in one of the major programs and printing it out on like mosaic paper because it's not going to change, right? You're going to deliver this 12-month schedule. Is that more important, or is it really the 2 to 3, 4 week look ahead that you do have the office dialed in to your field? And what about the fab shop thing now? Is the fab shop in the middle of field to office? Is it on the side? What is your thought on look ahead schedules?
Yeah, you really kind of teed me up there. Perfect, Rob. For me, it kind of goes right back to, the saying of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? And, you see it a lot just coming from the software side now. You see it a lot in software trying to break that thing, whatever it is, whether it's a feature, whether it's whatever you're trying to accomplish, down in some more manageable pieces. Then remaining what's called agile during that, right? Making sure you're responsive to things that change. And it's one in the same with construction. You're going to have those changes. You're going to have that unexpected. And, it doesn't necessarily mean not to have that long-term plan in place, but remaining flexible inside that and being more responsive with those 3 to 4 weeks, smaller look aheads. That's really the workflow, I believe.
I hear you. And then the third part we talked about at the end of the session is an idea that I've been talking about with Jeff Sample, the Moneyball approach of looking at how the sports teams, in particular, the famous story from the Oakland Athletics, of how do you look at the amount of labor you have on a job and, well, can you really afford it? How do you look at putting your crews together by determining what is their hourly rate, their daily rate, their weekly rate? All those members have a rate, depending, if you're open, shop, or union, either side, your numbers. But how many project managers really sit down with the superintendents, right? And when you're building the crew out, figure out how many bodies can you afford? James, is that a crazy concept to bring into our industry of thinking about hourly rates with burden? And if you're seeing there's 1,000 hours in the project, has anybody taken 1,000 hours and timed it by your labor rate?
Right.
To see if that lines up on your profit chart?
Yeah, you definitely need to be tracking that if you're not already. I mean, it's borderline imperative and keeping up with that and then using it to your advantage, right, to make sure you're running, what's called lean, to make sure that you're not overstaffing. I mean, it's going to be evident when you're understaffing. I mean, that one's a given, but, overstaffing tends to kind of just creep in there. And it's really kind of it'll run like that for a while until you notice it. So it just allows you to be more proactive about how you're staffing that, just knowing those numbers, knowing those, just whatever that productivity is from that crew and so on. So yeah, you definitely have to track that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit on a good one there, overstaffing. Let's really dive into that. Does it happen that companies keep employees employed during odd times to make sure that they're there? I'm specifically talking let's just call it out, in the union environment. If you don't want to return them to the hall and take the chance of them not coming back, you may keep them on a job in a different spot. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I have seen it in the company that I worked at, and I've talked to so many companies that utilize that practice. I'm just advocating that if you're going to do that, you need to track those hours on the side to truly understand that wasn't in the original
right,
part
and be
of the job.
Proactive about it, right? Be proactive about
that's right.
Versus it being a reactive. Well, the job's getting shut down. I need to have someone to put this. I have this great journeyman, et cetera, that I really want to keep. In my wheelhouse. That's 100% fun. That's understandable, and that's a part of the workflow. But just making sure you're proactive about it, right? That you're intentional about that. And realizing where that number fits in, right, into where that number's going.
Absolutely. So that was the 3 things we talked about in the first part of the series that we're doing. Today, we're going to shift gears, and these are going to be number 4, 5, and 6. So we're going to talk a little bit about your personnel management, and that's going to follow up that Moneyball approach. I'm also going to talk about reducing material handling, and then we're going to kind of poke on a purple elephant, analyzing rework cost. James, you could probably test this. Most people in construction don't like to admit, externally or internally, that they have rework costs, but we all know it's there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sore subject, but it's one we all share, and it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's just it's part of the, it's part of the process. But yeah, it's definitely kind of almost a dirty word at times, right? It's something we all try and pretend we don't struggle with.
Absolutely. A superintendent I worked with at the very beginning of my career used to have a great phrase. Every time we started a project, to talk about, you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. And it's true. I mean, how many times do you execute the job perfectly, flawlessly, with no changes, no hiccups, no deviations?
Yep.
That's not what we do. We're not in manufacturing. Construction is a very unique world. So, well, let's think about that then. When we start talking about the complexity of production, this is the slide that I had up last time. And I really want to use it to kind of mentally set the tone, because you're looking at 3 different buildings. And they're at 3 different stages, right? You got one not quite done, topped out. There's one still working, and then there's a completed one. They're all actually similar buildings with slight deviations. And how do we track this productivity thing? One of my good mentors, Brent Darnell, I used the quote last time. He talks about the miracle of construction. And just to reiterate it, the way he is summarizing his ideas, think about this. What other industry on the planet operates like construction? And by that, he's referring to what other industry has this idea that you can take a different team with a different design and different materials and different workers at a different location in a different geography at a different time of the year with the weather, and think that it's going to go together perfectly every time.
For sure.
Owners are like, oh, it's magic. Just go build a building. Is the weather the same in Jacksonville, Florida, as Boston, Massachusetts, or Seattle, Washington, or Los Angeles, California?
Is the supply chain even for what you're ordering the same, right? So I mean, you can take it so much deeper.
It's crazy to think about just how much change gets thrown at us. That this is really not a constant. But that's what we're talking about today. Let's dive into some little bit of tips and tricks. Now, the last time I showed a different formula for productivity. And it's amazing how many of these formulas you can find on the internet. But, at the end of the day, I still think it's the way I'm summarizing it here. Your productivity is what? Well, you've got a number of units, that output number divided by hours of effort. But, James, what I want to talk about with you later on, it's not just the hours of effort in the field, though. When we really start talking about prefab and off-site items, how many companies are truly talking about that amount of money and hours going to, quote, building the widget? But even further, if we really, really roll it back, it's not installing the widget on the job site, and it's not building the widget and shipping it to the job site. What if we go all the way back to the point of origin of designing the widget?
For sure.
How many people fall that far back, So, crazy. Well, let's look at it like this then. When we're going to talk about productivity, there's going to be 3 states I want you to kind of think about with your crews. You've got the productive state, which means they're doing work. You have a non-productive state, which unfortunately is they're waiting. They're waiting for materials. They're waiting for instructions. They're waiting now. I mean, who would have thought in 2020 they had to wait to get on site? They had to wait so much to get on a buck hoist. They had to wait to get into a certain area. And, we have this thing impressed upon us now from COVID that really is rocking that non-productive state. Then there's support, just getting materials to the job, getting the materials moved around the job. Again, I always come back right now to that buck hoist example. How many employees can be on a buck hoist? How many times can you move materials? But if it's trying to be productive, how do you really focus on that productive state? Now, James, I want to throw it over to you. What is your understanding really in that first step of knowing where everybody is going and documenting the processes?
Yeah, I kind of want to add here that, really the first step here is just understanding where, what your process is and how it moves and where everything's going on at, right? I mean, you never, if you've never truly documented how your company just processes work all the way from bid to install, right? And just where every responsibility lies and how everything moves through the company, whether it's information, workload, et cetera. It really is the perfect time to do it when you're trying to evaluate, these 3, where everything falls into these 3 categories here, because it's really going to spawn a lot of those conversations, right? And a lot of understanding as well. And it really may even cause just some revelations even of just where each task falls in and where each one may really be in that non-productive state or that support state. And ultimately, it's going to allow you to staff the needed personnel to fill each as well, right? So just really taking that holistic view of your process and not just one individual task, but really your whole process and how it fits into these three.
I like that. I think there's a lot of good insights there. And that'll lead me to talking about it this way. Now, these are just rough numbers that I've thrown out here, but let's just say you're looking at a project, and let's assume you're at 50% productive time, which, James, I think some of the numbers you've probably seen, I've seen, that's extremely generous.
It's normally a little less. Site. We'll just say a little less.
Just a little less, just a bit outside that mark at 50. Let's assume, though, it's 50%, and then only 35% non-productive and 15% support time. The question I'm throwing out here, at the companies that you work at, people that are listening, do you have these buckets identified? And by that I mean, do you have a way that you're tracking the production? Are you doing it through a paper form, through an Excel spreadsheet, there's a lot of very interesting software now that can track it through either photos, through BIM, 3D files, through simple time cards. There's lots of ways to do this. But the question I'm throwing out there, actually really the challenge that I'm throwing out, is do you know your productive versus non-productive time? How are you going to be able to do that and really kind of move your company forward? James, it'd be interesting to really kind of get a poll question out again to a lot of people. What do you really think, or do you actually know? What is your, quote, non-productive time, you know?
Right. Yep, for sure.
Now, one area you can go and actually look, our friends over at NECA working with the Electric Foundry actually went through a very detailed questioning and survey period with their members. Now, granted, these numbers are very focused with NECA members, so this is Union Electrical Contractors. And I've got a link in here if you want to go pull down the report and read it, because I believe it's still free to anyone that wants to pull it down. We talked about it last time a little bit, but the two numbers in particular that I want to hone in on to bring back up and surface. James, what do you think about this? They're talking a 20% impact on businesses right now. And this is, again, the COVID filter. They're saying 7% lost labor hours because of the pandemic mitigation activities, like we discussed, longer lines to get on site from the temperature scans, the reduced amount of, buck hoist activity, or the scaffold stair tower, the access, which is compounding over here on the right side at 12.4% overall. Now, granted, this is on vertical construction, but have you heard any numbers similar to this or contrary to this from the customers that you're working with of what has the impact of COVID really been to the production since March?
Yeah, for me, there's a lot I could unpack here, but for me, I would be very surprised if it isn't even higher than these numbers, right? I wouldn't see it at all be surprising to be looking at maybe even 10%, even up to 15 with just the lost hours or the labor hours lost, simply because some companies are going to be better at adapting to that initially than others, just depending on what resources they have immediately available. And just their staffing and how they handle those workloads and so on. So I would say for that range, I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot higher ranges here. But yeah, I mean, it's something that we're seeing just across the industry. So if anyone on the call is kind of experiencing the same thing, I mean, it goes without saying, you're not alone if you're seeing these numbers or even anything higher.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us to why we're here to talk today. What are some ways we can do to try and make a positive impact or control some of these things? So first, let's talk about personnel management. Now, this one is definitely a little bit kind of touchy-feely in some ways if we think about it, but it's getting to the root of communication in our industry. Now, a number that I shared last time that I think is still relevant that I want to bring back up here is that the AEC industry, we're employing roughly 1,100 fewer people today than in 2007. Let that sink in just for a minute. And that they're talking about growing to 3,000 people less by 2028. Now, before March, that number was really kind of freaking me out because there's been so much talk about the lack of qualified labor. But James, I got to wonder at this point, because of COVID, the effects on other industries. We are blessed that construction, yes, we have been impacted, but we have not been shut down. We have not had these horrific interruptions to the business, such as airplanes,
right,
travel on ships, casinos, hotels. I mean, the leisure travel industry, wow, where do you even begin to quantify that impact?
It's been decimated, and I mean, I highly doubt that the effects in some fashion, won't be long term. I mean, obviously some of it's going to be harder on the short term than others, but even as we come out of this, I still see drastic changes in a lot of those industries.
Absolutely. I was spitballing with some people the other day online and thinking, all right, if we're looking at this prior problem we had, that we are having less people come into the construction industry and we're having people cycle out faster, well, isn't this the time now, if you own a business, to be looking at those other industries that have suffered these losses? And it's horrible. It's horrific. I hate it for these industries. But let's think about now. What if you're in construction and you're a mechanical, electrical, or plumbing company that you have new construction and you do renovation work as well? One in particular, I'm just going to throw it out there. And James, I'm curious to get your thoughts. Let's think about the airline industry or the shipping industry. There's a lot of trained mechanics, electricians, and plumbers in those industries, correct, to keep the planes, the boats, and the hotels running.
For sure.
If they've lost their job, and granted, I'm not licensed in any of those trades, I'm not skilled in any of them, but I am just pontificating. If you can find a mechanical, electrical, or a plumber that's trained in another industry, wouldn't it be not too hard, do you think, to bring them into our industry and retool their skill set just a little bit, and that they can sell over here?
Yeah, there's definitely crossover, but between those two, positions, right? So yeah, I definitely don't think it's a stretch to say that with a little bit of, like you said, retooling, retraining, that it can quite easily be adaptable to be used in the construction industry. And that's part of one of the reasons why I love the trade so much, is because it's integral, right? It can't necessarily stop. It's what it's how we all get around. It's how we we even have a roof over our heads. So that is one of the benefits of being in the industry, right? Is that we are affected by things that are going on now, but it's normally not a complete stop ship. So, but yeah, I think as we continue to see these effects on the industry, even long term, I think you may see that more and more, right? Some of those previous employees trying to retool themselves and figure out where their skill sets are applicable, and I don't think it's a stretch to think that a lot of them could definitely be used in construction.
Absolutely. Now, let's think about it from this perspective. When we're talking about managing personnel, there's a few things I just want to throw out on the table and see if anybody has any challenge to it. First, as we've previously talked about, construction changes literally every hour. Our job sites are not static. We go out on a new build and sometimes clear out trees or land and start with the foundation and go up, or we go sideways. Renovations, there's nothing static in our industry. Construction is constantly changing, which, as a byproduct, unfortunately leads to numbers that I've seen, up to 80% of the time, staff, field level crews are not supervised. They're not being given direction, which then makes you wonder this third part about training employees to work more efficiently. It kind of goes back to the what's in it for me part, right? Of if a crew's told what to do, they do it. But if they're not told, all right, I want you to do 2 sequential things or 3 sequential things,
yep,
do they know the next step and take the initiative themselves to start the next task? That's what we're getting at. But what have you seen in the past, James? Is you think 80% of unsupervised time, is that a little high, or is that spot on?
It's probably pretty close, in all honesty. And what you start to see there is a lot of it has to do with just shifting priorities on the job site. There's always a scramble, with how messy job sites are, right? Everyone's always getting pulled in different directions, and that's definitely a contributing factor. But regardless, I mean, yeah, you see this over and over again. And then it's very similar to what you say in that a lot of times, and we can touch on this in one of the next slides here, but a lot of times your crew may even know what to do, but do they feel trusted enough to know that they can make that decision themselves, right? So we'll touch on more of that later. But yeah, I don't think this number is too far off at all.
I hear you. Well, let's start diving into this and think about it. If we get into the mentality of working, specifically in construction, who do the workers really feel that they work for? And I've seen this across the board. Some workers are beholden to the company, but as you get into the company, they may be more aligned with the division that they work in, or even the project, even down to the crew level, right? Depending on the size of the company and the culture, how do they identify, like, what is their purpose? Why are they here? Who do they align with? Especially if you start thinking that in construction, it is a rather transient workforce. That I remember being very new to the industry. Now, granted, when I was brought in, I was convinced initially to be a salary employee, which is a very different mindset than an hourly employee in our industry, right? Because every Friday, I didn't worry about where my next check was coming from. And that's what I'm trying to get at with this transient work. You don't exactly have a guarantee of 365 days of employment, right? It's a weird model to wrap your mind around about, well, what's in it for them? Because I'll call out a little bit of something here. I think sometimes crews have maybe drawn out a job or a task a little bit, trying to stretch to that next job. The companies don't want that to happen. But again, what is their guarantee of a job every single week, every Friday getting paid? There's no guarantees, is there?
Right. No, I mean, I completely agree with you there. It's, it's a real catch-22, and I think it originally stems just with the flow of construction, how you can, need someone literally to be working overtime one week and have nothing for them to do even sometimes a week later. So I think that's where it comes from, but it doesn't carry those inherent challenges, and it's something you really once again have to be proactive about, right, instead of reactive. So yeah, I definitely see that as well.
I'll tell you, one thing about that mentality, and also about how to talk to people, something you want to definitely think about is make sure the crews know what to do. And one of the most basic things that I've seen done very successfully, it kind of caught me off guard when I noticed, again, when I first started, a lot of the older school superintendents were training me and teaching me how the business worked. I'm here as the safety guy blowing the whistle saying, you can't do this, you can't do that. And they're trying to explain how projects really get built. But watching certain of the superintendents have that masterful skill of coordinating and working with crews, asking people to repeat something back. Because at first, I'll be honest, I thought, man, that's kind of belittling and humbling. Like, you don't think the person really just heard you? But I worked in construction longer and started to understand how many orders are given in a day, how many decisions the superintendent has to make. It's amazing how many times I started sitting back and watching when a superintendent that didn't do this tactic would just say something and the crew would nod their head, yes, and then literally go back to whatever they were doing and totally disregard what they're just told to do or the change in direction.
Right.
Versus that very simple command of, hey, look, James, I want you to dig that footer 2 more feet to the east. Got that?
Clear, concise communication.
Yeah. And having you actually repeat back, what did I just tell you to do? You wanted me to dig 2 more feet to the east. Great.
Right.
Locks it in your brain for some reason. Simple trick, though. Very simple trick.
Yep. Or,
how many times, James, how about this? In your career, how many times did anyone above your pay grade ever ask you, hey, do you think, is there a better way to do this? Have you seen something else work better? How many times did anybody ever ask you that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not often, unfortunately, and I don't think it's just limited to myself as well. I'm sure you've experienced the same things as well as anyone else. In the webinar here, it's very common, and it just I think it comes from where we kind of isolate ourselves into our own island as far as management structures and so on, and just kind of get caught up in trying to make sure a decision is made. Putting all of that pressure on ourselves, and ultimately we still carry that, right? But it's still vital to just get feedback from the people who are most affected by those decisions as well. And then 2, it makes it more of a collaborative effort, and you're more likely to execute whatever that decision is more effectively because you have the whole buy-in at that point. So,
absolutely. Well, that leads me to the next talk point to kind of think through. The way I'm looking at it, there's 4 work needs for individuals. If we kind of break it down from some studies that I've read in different articles, is 4 things. First, measured results. The second is communication. The third is your pride in your work, which is a very interesting subject in our industry. Mike Rowe's done a lot to bring that to the forefront of being proud to be a contractor. And then the financial reward, which gets really weird about, some companies I've seen, the employees are, at least the supervision, the project management, the supervision understands the risk reward wager of what is the profit in a job. Some companies, it's an elusive, mysterious number that nobody ever knows. It makes you really wonder about this measured result concept. And let's dive into that and think about it for a minute. When I'm saying measured results, is it conveyed from the office to the field? What are the amount of hours to do a task? For example, if they're creating their budgets, if they're creating their estimates on installing, let's just say, drywall versus pipe, how do you know the parameters of how many feet per day of either linear feet, cubic feet, whatever that result is? It's an interesting concept to think through. If you're building this estimate in the office, you're handing it to the field to run, how much are they given? But more importantly, when it's about how much information is given, what is the feedback that you've seen there? James, I'm kind of curious, what have you seen and heard as far as feeling trusted and empowered with understanding these measured results?
Yeah, for me, that's one I'd actually even add there is as far as one of those just key things that you have to have from individuals is just that mutual feeling of trust and just empowerment. And it kind of touches on some of those things we've been talking about throughout. But, your team really has to feel just trusted and empowered. And it's one that gets overlooked very often, right? But it's really vital. You have to empower your employees just to make decisions and really, prevent yourself from also becoming that decision bottleneck as well. Ultimately just trying to give as much control as possible to whoever's experiencing that problem. And it's more than likely going to lead to the best solution as well because, they're more intrinsically also, involved in those processes at sometimes. And then ultimately, because of all that, it's just going to build that mutual trust, that mutual understanding, and, ultimately accomplish things better because of it. So, that's one I would definitely add in.
I would agree. Well, let's keep moving into the next tip. Number 5, reduce material handling. Now, this is definitely going to be a lean concept, right, of trying to understand the number of touches. And if you really buy into lean construction, that's a huge thing. I remember first being exposed to this, over 10 years ago. And the company that I was at, we were looking at the lean classes at the AGC. We were studying the Lean Construction Institute. We hired a consultant. And I'll never forget, we bring the consultant out to a job over in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, 4 garden-style apartments, 4-story garden-style apartments. So lots of wood, right? And still love that superintendent, man. He taught me a lot. But I've never had the more awkward feeling of bringing the lean consultant out to look at a job. And James, I kid you not, I don't know what kind of deal he made with the wood vendor, but I swear every stick of wood needed for those 4 buildings was on site at one time. I've never seen material move more in my life. And literally there was 3 or 4 forklifts just moving wood all day. And this guy's shaking his head, walking around. He's writing down timestamps on, bundles of 2x4s or stacks of plywood and just tracking how many times it's moved and then going in. I could see where he was heading with asking the superintendent about why he did it. And then there was all the bragging of the money that he saved on the price and this, that, and the other. And then the guy started running through calculations of how much does that forklift operator make? How much does that forklift operator make? By the way, how much do those 4 forklifts cost you? And I could just see it was like a deflating balloon, right? I was like, oh, wow. It was.
Well, what's so interesting about it is that's why you're prefabbing to begin with, right? Is to reduce those touches on whatever material that is. And, if you're not careful, you can often end up creating more for yourself just trying to, be proactive about it to begin with. So, yeah, it's definitely a big one.
Crazy. So we have a quick poll we're going to throw up here, and we're very curious. Does your company actively track material movement on site? I'm very curious what people say on this one because it is a slippery slope. How many times are you going to track something? Well, Rob's answer would be until it's installed. Ideally installed once, right, James? Not twice.
Right. Yeah. And we'll throw in some other things on that later, I'm sure. But definitely track it all the way. I mean, as far as you can, as far as whatever technology you have available to you at that time to track it, as far as you can go for sure.
We got 3 responses. Yeah. I would wager that's about accurate. Well, let's talk about this then. Here's a number I want to talk about. We're talking about the rising cost of materials, which, now granted, this number was from last year. These numbers I'm talking about, again, with the COVID filter, I'm not even sure where this is going to be. But they're talking about the rising cost of materials. And we're looking at 65% of projects over that billion mark are talking to 35%. I'm not even sure, James, these are going to be accurate right now with the COVID filter, because we have to think, just look, as you've mentioned, our supply chains across the board. If construction has been somewhat left to run on its own, here's the problem. All the material suppliers that supply us, concrete, kind of a different animal, right? It's giant outdoor plants. There's piles of stone and aggregate and powder. They make concrete outside, bricks and mortar and stuff, kind of so. Okay, windows, plumbing, electrical components. That's all done in manufacturing. And from my limited understanding as a quality person going to certain places, they're pretty close to each other.
Yep.
What's going to happen to those plants that produce the materials that we need to go in? And then the spirals, too, of the transportation of how to get the materials. Even if they can continue making materials at full capacity, can they get them to the job sites through the supply chain right now?
For sure. Yeah, I haven't I haven't ordered any copper in some time, but I can imagine that they're experiencing the same issues that even our food supply chain experienced and kind of still is experiencing in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's all one and the same as far as those challenges. So,
absolutely. Well, let's think about it like this: how many moves, really? If we look at the basic, and I would argue and wager. Let's assume when we're just talking about when materials hit the job site, I'm saying it's at least 3.2 from a lot of the things that I've looked at. Maybe it's 4, but if we just think through it ourselves, a material arrives on a site, on a flatbed truck, a box truck, a pickup, gooseneck, whatever. So move number 1 is it's got to come off said transportation, correct? And it probably, I'm going to argue, still hits the ground. As they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with it, it gets picked up by a forklift, maybe a different type of loader, but they're somewhere and they're trying to move it closer to the building to either get it on the buck hoist, or maybe they're going to use the forklift and it's going to get boomed up, or a crane's going to pick it. So that's number 2. Then it hits the floor, or the area it's supposed to be at, right? It's supposed to go to the 4th floor. Let's really kind of think through and be honest. Most likely now, if it came in, as we're talking in a prefab world, if it came in on pallets, they're going to bring a pallet jack. There's number 4. Or if it's board, hands are going to get it. I mean, it's not hard to argue. Let's assume it's at least 4 touches just at the job site.
Or if you're prefabbing a whole floor at one time, maybe you just drop it all right there in the floor, right? And then it gets moved again. Yep. So you've moved it up to that floor, and then now the individual crews start sorting through it, moving it to their respective areas, and so on. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of opportunity there to be double, triple, quadruple handling material.
Easily, especially if the schedules are not sequenced, the deliveries aren't sequenced, because this never happens, right? You never sit on a job when the concrete truck is sitting there at the pump with drywall behind it, 4 box trucks waiting at that one point of entry to drop their stuff off. That never happens, right?
Yep.
Never happens. So think about implementing, just a number of touches. And we're talking about those basic 4, but really, once it's past there, start thinking about it and implement some things kind of like, the 3 S's from the lean concept. Or more importantly, let's really dive down and think about it like this. What if you really prepare an optimized job site? By that I mean, if you're thinking every day of where are your crews and where do they need to be, why not reach out to the other people working with you? If you're a mechanical, talk to the electrical, the plumber, the drywall. If you're the drywall, why not talk to each other, trying to optimize everybody's day to be the best? Because, that first in, first out mentality, I think that's gone in 2020. You can't just go in and blow and go and put all your things in and leave everybody at the wayside. Or let's look at just-in-time material delivery. Now, from my experience in trying to convince construction crews, James, to buy into this idea of just-in-time delivery, it freaks them out to a level.
Yeah, they want it there as soon as they can, right?
And as much as you can get. But here's the problem. I mean, if you're building a 4-story apartment, and let's say it's 40 units, is there really enough material, storage, lay down area to put 40 toilets, 40 sinks, 40 shower pans? Forget about it, right? You got to really kind of let loose of that and think about just getting a day or two ahead, not a week or two ahead. And then also, where are you going to stack that material? Or, this is where I'm very curious to hear your insights, fabricating off-site. Why is it such a valuable thing to contemplate of bringing in pre-created assemblies of maybe it's that full electrical panel or it's the water closet assembly? Why is it so valuable when done right to build something off-site that you literally could send to a site and bolt on within a day or two of delivery?
Yeah, there's really a lot you can kind of unpack here. And what I think it really comes down to, number one, is just being intentional about prefabbing. You know, it's such a buzzword now, you know, and for good reason. I mean, it is definitely something that the industry has to continue to do. But, you know, oftentimes you see a lot of companies almost just sometimes doing it for the sake of it. You know, you just can't do that. You know, it's got to be very intentional, or what you'll quickly wind up with, just kind of as the just-in-time delivery is alluding to here, is you'll just start paying yourself storage. And it's something I actually ran into when I was, you know, in the prefab side of the business, in that we expanded our prefab shop just for storage. And you can guess how long that lasts. We ultimately, you know, realized we really just needed to hone in our processes and versus continuing to make room for the bad one, right? So there's a lot there, and I think one of the big things is, you know, you just have to be intentional about it. Not just doing it just so you can say, you know, we prefab everything, but, you know, are you prefabbing it in a way that makes the most sense, where you're doing those things like reducing the handling? I'm not moving it from here to here. I'm not moving it around even inside of my shop just to make room for it. You know, and I'm building it when needed, and just communicating that to your superintendents and letting them know that, hey, when you need it, you will have it for sure. So, you know, kind of alleviating some of that stress. And then also doing it off site is the final thing I need to throw out there. You know, I think it almost becomes self-evident as far as, you know, with COVID and the new landscape, but that's one of the benefits, right, is you're able to work in that controlled environment. You're able to, when things like this happen, you're able just to enforce those safety standards in a really controlled manner. There's just so much you can touch on here, but I think really it's just about being very intentional and having a plan, not just for your prefab, but how you're prefabbing.
I like that. Let's really think about it this way. Last time I talked about developing the site logistics plan, and this was an example from Plans for Less that actually builds these out. But I'm curious, I was talking about this from the construction side, from the site. Is there an opportunity, you think, to actually lay out your fab shops with a concept like this of basically where do materials come in, how are they assembled, processed, and packaged, and how do they go out? Like, is there literally a flow map that shows
absolutely
A, B, C, D? How does your team on the floor know what they're doing and how to get there?
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely critical. You know, it's just as, for the same reasons that it is for having that logistics plan on site. You know, it's self-evident why you should, you know, have one for just your in-house shop. And there's a couple of things. You know, number one, it's going to allow, you know, just the least amount of touches on that as possible. Number two, it's going to make sure that the movement is efficient, right? But then three, it's really going to let you evaluate that process of, you know, what's very common, you know, in the industry, especially in the start to get into the manufacturing world, which is where a lot of
James, are you there? Did he cut out for you too?
He cut out. He was laying out such good content, his phone got overloaded.
Yeah, it did. It got overheated. I'm going to chat him, but do you want to keep that convo going while we figure out his technical difficulties?
Absolutely. We'll go ahead and we're going to cycle into the last part of today real quick and talk about a little bit of a purple elephant. So rework costs. This is something I'm pretty sure most people listening don't want to talk about at your companies, inside your companies, outside your companies, but it's something I think we have to bring up and we have to really talk about. So I'm going to throw the poll up here real quick. Do you compare your bid number to the actual cost. And by that, what we're asking is, so you prepare an estimate to go to contract and win a job. I'm asking you, do you actually go back and compare the actual cost that you've recognized to the original to see where they line up? I hope they're very close, but I'll be candid, from my former life, there was a very big difference in a guesstimate to an estimate. So got a couple answers coming in here. Don't be shy. We can't see what you're saying. We're just wanting to hone in and kind of understand. I'm hoping that these are both a yes. That would be amazing to know.
What if they aren't? What happens then?
Well, that'd be the status quo, unfortunately. And we're going to challenge that a little bit, because you've really got to know what the execution is out in the field. If you want your historic tables, your historic charts, all the data that you have when you're building these estimates, if you want it to be accurate, it's got to be updated. It can't be from 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I would say now with the COVID filter, it can't even be from last year. The work that companies are bidding right now, you got to put the COVID factor on it. Let's be honest. And I'm not sure what that factor is. Each company's got to determine that for themselves. All right, we got 3 people that were willing to take the poll with it.
All right, let's push that. Wow.
Yeah, 100%. That is awesome. Everybody else that didn't answer, I hope you have the same answer.
Maybe they didn't want to answer because it's no.
Well, let's talk about that. So here's an interesting stat that I pulled from doing some research last night thinking about this. Now, granted, this is a different kind of concept, but follow me through here. So from doing some research on a website, law.com, it is talking about the sheer number of construction defects in Florida. Now, this is tracking this from 2008 to 2017. So if we all remember 2008, 9, 10, that was a weird time. So in 2008, they're saying there's only 31 construction defect complaints filed, which to me is fascinating that in Florida that was the real number. Because if anyone that's built in Florida, any residential properties, you know what I'm getting at. But now it's increased to 1,000 in 2017. Now, a couple things we can throw out here is, number one, it takes years for defects to pop up. If we're talking about the skin of the building, the windows, the roof, the systems, it takes a while for it to kind of pop up. But this is something that we got to think about is, what are these factors driving change in rework? Well, we're in an odd time now, and people are stressed out. So are they thinking at their most clearest at all time with the work that they're putting in place? Or, as we've talked, we're bringing a lot of new people into the industry, and how well have they been trained? I can tell you lots of horror stories about different trades. One time there was a job where somebody didn't understand how much glue to put on PVC pipe when doing water systems. And we had lots of blowouts. Or there's a couple of jobs that I was on where people installing sprinkler heads didn't quite understand how many times you're supposed to turn the wrench. I mean, things happen. But how is your company going to future-proof and protect yourself? So let's unpack this a little bit and talk about it. First, you got to study the problem. And the problem here we're talking about is defects. You got to be honest with each other. And this, I'll go ahead and say it, is painful. Some companies don't like doing this, but other companies that can get real and honest with each other, that's how you prevent this from happening again. So how do you do it? I advise select a defect. Pick something out that you build and that you've had repeated issues with, and look at it, because it could be a process issue. It could be a staff issue. It could be a material issue. But get this work team together to analyze it, and really you got to decide, how do you want to measure that defect? At the end of the day, it's very interesting to see kind of where we're going. But you got to really think about it, is how do you study the variation of the cause? So James, you back with us?
He says he is, but I think he still might be having mic problems.
No, I'm sorry, guys. I was having a little bit of mic problems. We should be good now.
You're back with us. So talk to me. What do you think about this defect analysis? Is this a smart idea for companies to dive into, or do we just continue that status quo of acting like all the numbers really work out magically?
No, Rob, I really think I think it's vital. And I think it almost even has to be a holistic thing as well, right? You definitely start with that one defect just to really, get the process fine-tuned. But then after that, implement it as a holistic analysis. And then you can even drive it a little farther and really kind of interweave it into your culture as well, right? And just to kind of throw out a couple examples, I mean, you can take it to, reevaluating, your admin overhead for that defect. How much even did my admin cost? What was the result of that? Even redrawing from a BIM perspective. Even if it's just a redrawing on an as-built, right, after the fact. So just those little minute things that ultimately really come into that bottom line, because what it's really going to allow is just that estimate to be completely accurate whenever, you start incorporating all of those X factors into those final numbers. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's vital.
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple things we need to bring up real quick as we wrap up. There's two things about this, because this, again, is a purple elephant. It's a hot potato company. I get that. Two things you want to focus on. First is communication. Make sure you're using, efficient, effective tools. Also, make sure you're using real-time information of having the right stats. And the hardest part, and unfortunately, here's where the COVID filter pops in again. These, to me, James, have to be in-person meetings. Ideally face-to-face. Right now, maybe it does have to be over a Zoom call. But there is a certain human element of talking to each other about very painful issues and being in the same time, the same space of opening, honest communication. And the whole thing, again, this is a spirit of improving your company. It's not a I got you moment or you don't do this right. James, what you're talking about, it's building in that DNA into your company, your culture of constant improvement of we want to deliver the best of what we can do at all times to protect that company reputation, right?
Yeah, you really have to make it, collaborative. And I think that's the biggest key there to making it successful is versus it being analyzing, okay, how did this department fail? More about, okay, how did us as a whole, what was the miscommunications? What were the missteps? And really remove the blame portion of it and removing that stigma and just focusing on the issue at hand and, kind of portraying it as almost a positive. We're doing this to get better, not to realize why, what we did wrong, right, or how we did something wrong. But it's more about, in the spirit of trying to get better and just better everyone as a whole.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're getting close to the end of our time, so I'm going to move this down to the last part. And for everybody that's been listening today, first we want to say thank you so much for listening and taking our polls. But more importantly, I'm going to leave my contact information up here for a minute. So for those of you that don't know, I'm currently working with ESUB as a strategic solutions engineer, which is fancy for saying, hey, listen, I understand the construction industry, I think, and technology. I'm here to help you talk about the options and possibilities that we might be able to help your company out with. And specifically, ESUB is a project management tool. So this is my information, my new work email address, direct cell phone, also how to find me or the company online. If there's any questions you have, or if I could help you out, love to have some offline conversations. And don't forget as well, MEP Force is coming up. There's some great sessions there, James. I think you're doing a couple presentations, correct?
For sure. One of the ones that I'm most excited about is my my tips on leadership, specifically for BIM management, which in a lot of ways goes hand in hand with a lot of these slides we've been talking about here. So yeah, definitely give that one a stop in and let me know what you guys think on that one as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody today for joining us. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a third part of this. Otherwise, we hope to see you at MEP Force virtually and hopefully again in person sometime. I want to say in 2020, but maybe 2021.
For sure.
And Rob, do you have a promo code maybe some of these guys could use? I can't even remember what yours is.
You sent me one, and I'm going to have to dig that up. You know what? I'm going to put that on social media later today because I know you sent it to me, and I'm struggling to remember off the top of my head what it is.
Well, I can't remember it either. Anyways, everyone follow Rob on social. He's got a promo code for you that'll get you in with a nice discount there.
Yep. Give me a couple hours to dig that up, and we'll put a fresh post up today.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate you spending your time with us and trust it was meaningful and impactful for you and your business. We look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. Thanks, everyone.